Today, we are diving into a really powerful story about two backpacking trips. One of them ends in total disaster, and the other one, well, the other one ends in wisdom. It's a story that really gets at the huge gap between what we wish were true and what's actually real. Fantasy versus reality, and the consequences of the choices we make. Let's get right into it. So imagine this. You hear this cry of just pure desperation. It's coming from a group of students who are cold, soaked, and absolutely miserable after their idealistic little backpacking trip completely falls apart. This one accusation, "This is your fault," really sets the stage for the whole story. It forces us to ask, when things go wrong, is our first instinct to find someone to blame, or do we take a hard look at the choices that got us there in the first place?
All right, so our story kicks off in the middle of the night. A brutal storm just slams into the campsite. And this is that moment, the moment the student's fantasy of being all one with nature just collides head-on with the harsh, cold, wet reality of it. The consequences? They're immediate, and they are severe.
I mean, just look at the contrast here. It's wild. Before the trip, these students were all about total immersion. They were even, get this, defending the rain's right to fall on them. But when that fantasy became a real shivering in the dark reality, when their little leaf shelters started leaking and they couldn't sleep, all that idealism just vanished. The baptism by rain they thought sounded so romantic suddenly felt a lot more like drowning.
And here we see that classic cycle of blame, right? Instead of thinking, maybe building a shelter out of leaves right before a storm was a bad idea, the blame just keeps shifting outward. First, it's the rain's fault. Then it's the bug's fault. Then the sun isn't warm enough. And finally, when there's nothing left in nature to blame, it lands on their guide, a figure named God, the very source of the wisdom they were so proud to have ignored. So the next morning, the whole situation just escalates into this really dramatic confrontation. The students, they're at their breaking point. They finally admit they were wrong. But their apology? Well, it comes with a demand, and that leads to a pretty profound lesson about what mercy really means.
You can just feel the desperation in this plea, can't you? They finally get it. They admit their guide's wise instruction list was correct all along. But listen closely. There's a subtext here. Their apology isn't just about saying sorry. It's a transaction. They think saying we're sorry is the magic key that unlocks an immediate rescue, a way to just, poof, make the consequences of their bad choices disappear.
And God's response is so precise. He gives them exactly what they ask for. Forgiveness. He says, "I don't hold your foolish fantasies against you." But, and this is a huge but, he draws a crystal clear line. Forgiving their choices is not the same thing as erasing the natural consequences of those choices. The big point here is that forgiveness isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card.
And wow, this line just hits so hard. It's such a powerful metaphor for accountability, isn't it? There's no helicopter swooping in to save the day, no magic shortcut. The only way out of the mess they've made is to do the hard work of fixing it themselves. The path out is the same difficult one they chose to walk in on.
Okay, so now the story completely shifts gears. We're introduced to a second hike, but this time it's led by God's son, G. And this trip isn't about learning from failure. It's about learning the skills and the wisdom you need to actually succeed from the very beginning.
So who is this new guide, Jeffy? The story presents him not as a rescuer, but as an example, as a guide in the truest sense. He doesn't just know the wise instruction list, he lives it. His authority comes from his experience, and his goal is to empower the students, not to enable their bad decisions.
The tools he provides are totally different too. It's not just a list of gear anymore, it's like a curriculum for navigating life. Yeah, he provides the same wise instructions, but he adds this prophecy map of the future and actually teaches the internal skills, wisdom, faith, discernment that you need to use it. This is a huge shift from rebellion to preparation.
And this brings us to what might be the core lesson of G's entire hike, and it's illustrated perfectly through a student named Abby. Her story reveals this deep misunderstanding of what it means to actually be guided, and it forces a real confrontation between belief and personal responsibility.
Abby's perspective is just fascinating. She's turned faith into this totally passive belief system. For her, feeling unworthy or incapable is a reason to do nothing. She literally thinks that just believing G's will carry her backpack is enough to make it happen, and that this absolves her of any personal effort. It's a comforting fantasy for sure, but it's a fantasy that has zero power in the real world.
G's response is the exact opposite of her fantasy. It's direct, it's practical, and he does not budge. He doesn't lecture her or get into a debate. He just stops the whole group and makes it clear your journey cannot continue until you take responsibility for your own load. In this story, guidance means showing you the path, not carrying you down it.
So let's talk about this prophecy map, because it is a really big deal in this story. The parable is very clear that this isn't some kind of spoiler for your life. It's a tool of wisdom. What it does is it lets you see the likely consequences of your choices before you make them, so that when you get to a fork in the road, you can choose the path that leads to success, not to a dead end.
All right, let's bring all these lessons together, because the story's core message really boils down to this critical distinction between two very different ways of approaching the unknown. It's the ultimate showdown, faith versus fantasy.
And here you can see the difference, laid out plain and simple. In this parable, faith isn't blind at all. It's the courage to act on a wise plan. It's built on knowledge, on wisdom, and it helps you push through fear. Fantasy, on the other hand, that's the belief that if you want something bad enough, reality will just bend to your will. The hope that natural laws like gravity or the fact that you need a tent in a storm just don't apply to you.
And this is it, the final crystallizing lesson from G, and probably the most important takeaway from the entire story. Reality is real. The map of the world, with all its cliffs and rivers and storms, it exists, whether we like it or not. We can either learn how to read that map, or we can just wander off the trail insisting that the cliff isn't really there, right up until the moment we step off of it.
So we're going to end with this question. The parable gives us a map, a guide, and a set of wise instructions. It lays out a clear path. And yet, how often do we still choose to take our own detours? Why is the allure of the unmapped path sometimes stronger than the wisdom that's trying to guide us home? Something to think about.